Jake Miller wiped the grease from his hands and looked around his small repair shop. It wasn't much, just a metal building at the edge of Frontier Station 7, but it was his. Most days were quiet out here on the colony's border. He fixed broken tractors, patched up mining equipment, and occasionally worked on a shuttle that had seen better days. The pay wasn't great, but Jake didn't mind. He liked the simple life, far away from the crowded inner systems where everyone was always in a hurry. That morning started like any other. Jake was having his coffee and checking the day's work orders when the station's alarm system went off. Not the loud emergency kind, just a soft beep that meant something unusual had been detected. He pulled up the scanner data on his old computer screen and frowned. There was a heat signature in the valley about 5 miles east. Something had crashed there during the night. Jake grabbed his toolkit and climbed into his beaten-up hover truck. The colony didn't have much in the way of emergency services, so when something went wrong, people like Jake had to deal with it themselves. As he drove across the rocky terrain, he wondered what he'd find. Probably just a meteorite or some space debris. Nothing exciting ever happened out here. But when he reached the crash site, Jake realized this was different. The object had carved a deep trench in the red soil, and there was still smoke rising from the impact point. He approached carefully, one hand on the emergency beacon in his pocket. If this was some kind of alien threat, he'd need to call for backup fast. What he found made him stop dead in his tracks. Lying in the center of the crater was a creature unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was small, maybe the size of a large dog, covered in scales that shimmered between blue and silver. 2 wings spread out from its back, but one of them was bent at a horrible angle. Blood, dark purple and thick, pooled beneath the injured wing. Jake's first thought was that he was looking at some kind of alien animal. His second thought was that it was dying. The creature's breathing was shallow and rapid, and its eyes were barely open. But those eyes. When they focused on Jake, he saw something that made his chest tighten. There was intelligence there. Real, deep understanding. This wasn't just an animal. This was a thinking being. He'd heard stories, of course. Every kid in human space grew up on tales of dragons and mythical beasts. But those were just stories. Weren't they? Yet here he was, staring at something that looked exactly like the dragons from old Earth legends. Wings, scales, a long tail with ridges running down its spine. Even small horns just beginning to grow from its head. Jake made a decision. He couldn't just leave it here to die. Carefully, he moved closer, talking in a soft, calm voice. The creature watched him but didn't try to move. Maybe it understood he was trying to help. Maybe it was just too hurt to care. Jake pulled out his medical scanner, the one he used to check for toxic materials in damaged equipment. The readings were completely bizarre, showing energy patterns he'd never seen before, but one thing was clear. The wing was badly broken. He'd set broken bones before, mostly on livestock back when he worked on his family's farm as a kid. This couldn't be that different, right? Jake went back to his truck and gathered everything he thought he might need. Carbon fiber rods from his repair supplies, bioadhesive gel that he used to patch hull breaches, and some strong synthetic bandaging. Working slowly, Jake examined the damaged wing. The membrane was torn in 3 places, and he could see where the bones had snapped. The creature made small whimpering sounds as he worked, but it didn't try to stop him. It seemed to understand that he was trying to help. Jake carefully aligned the broken bones, using the carbon fiber rods as splints. He sealed the torn membrane with the bioadhesive gel, hoping it would hold. Finally, he wrapped everything in the bandaging to keep it stable. The whole process took nearly 3 hours. By the time he finished, the sun was high overhead, and Jake was exhausted. The creature's breathing had steadied though, and its eyes looked clearer. It made a soft chirping sound and tilted its head, studying Jake with what he could only describe as gratitude. Now came the hard part. He couldn't leave it here, but bringing an unknown alien creature back to the station would cause all kinds of problems. The colony officials would want to study it, maybe even dissect it. Jake looked into those intelligent eyes again and made his choice. He'd take it back to his shop and keep it hidden until it healed. Getting the creature back to his shop wasn't easy. Jake had to lift it carefully into the back of his truck, surprised by how light it was despite being almost 4 feet long. The dragon, if that's what it really was, seemed to trust him now. It didn't struggle or try to bite. It just watched him with those deep, golden eyes that seemed far too old for such a young creature. Jake drove back slowly, taking the long route around the colony to avoid the main roads. The last thing he needed was someone spotting his unusual passenger. When he finally pulled into his workshop, he breathed a sigh of relief. The building was isolated enough that nobody would come snooping around without a reason. He cleared out a space in the back storage room, laying down old blankets and setting up a heat lamp. The creature seemed to appreciate the warmth, curling up under the light and closing its eyes. Jake sat nearby, watching it sleep and wondering what he'd gotten himself into. He should report this. There were protocols for discovering new alien species. But something told him that would be a mistake. Over the next few days, Jake fell into a new routine. He'd work on his regular repair jobs during the day, all while keeping an eye on his hidden guest. At night, he'd sit with the creature, changing its bandages and making sure the wing was healing properly. He started calling it Spark, because every now and then, small flames would puff out of its nostrils when it sneezed. What amazed Jake most was how smart Spark turned out to be. By the third day, the dragon had figured out how to communicate basic needs. It would tap its water bowl with a claw when it was empty. It would make different sounds for different things. A low rumble meant it was content. A higher chirp meant it wanted attention. A sharp hiss meant something was wrong. By the end of the first week, Spark was trying to mimic human words. Jake nearly dropped his welding torch the first time he heard it. He'd been talking to himself, saying he needed to find food, when Spark opened its mouth and made a sound that was almost like food. The pronunciation was terrible, more like a scratchy foo, but the intent was clear. Jake started teaching it more words, speaking slowly and clearly. Spark picked up things faster than any animal Jake had ever seen. Within days, the dragon understood dozens of words and could even put together simple meanings. When Jake said hungry, Spark would point at the food containers. When he said careful, Spark would slow down whatever it was doing. The wing was healing well too. Jake had been worried the bioadhesive gel wouldn't work on alien biology, but it seemed to be holding. Spark would carefully stretch the injured wing each day, never pushing too hard. It was like the creature instinctively knew how to help itself heal. But then things got complicated. 2 weeks after Jake found Spark, the colony's long-range scanner started picking up strange readings. Jake heard about it at the local supply store, where everyone was talking about the mysterious energy signatures approaching from deep space. The readings didn't match any known ship design. They didn't match anything in the human database. Jake felt his stomach drop. He hurried back to his shop, a sense of dread building in his chest. When he showed Spark the scanner data on his tablet, the dragon's reaction confirmed his worst fears. Spark stood up immediately, wings spreading as much as the healing one allowed. The creature started making that deep, thrumming call, a sound that seemed to resonate in Jake's bones. It was pointing its snout toward the ceiling, toward the sky, calling to something out there in the darkness of space. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He sat in his workshop, watching Spark continue its calling. The dragon would cry out every few minutes, then wait, listening for something Jake couldn't hear. The energy signatures were getting closer. Station Command had put everyone on alert. Ships were being prepped for evacuation if needed. Nobody knew what was coming, but the sheer size of the energy readings had everyone scared. Jake realized then what he'd done. He'd saved someone's child. And now the parent was coming. He looked at Spark, who had finally tired itself out and was resting against his leg. The dragon trusted him completely. It had no idea that its rescue might have just doomed the entire colony. He thought about running, taking Spark and fleeing to another system. But where would they go? And would that even help? Whatever was coming could apparently cross the galaxy. Running seemed pointless. All Jake could do was wait and hope that whoever Spark's parent was, they'd understand he'd been trying to help. The scanner readings showed the approaching object would arrive within 24 hours. Jake spent that time making sure Spark's wing was as healed as possible. If they had to run, the dragon needed to be able to fly. He removed most of the bandaging, leaving only the support splints. The wing looked good, all things considered. The membrane had sealed, and the bones seemed straight. Spark sensed something was coming too. The dragon stayed close to Jake, making worried sounds whenever he moved too far away. It was afraid, Jake realized. Not of what was coming, but for him. Spark was worried about what might happen to the human who'd saved its life. The alarm started blaring at dawn. Jake was already awake, sitting with Spark and drinking his 4th cup of coffee. His hands were shaking, though he wasn't sure if it was from the caffeine or the fear. Through his workshop windows, he could see people running toward the colony's shelter bunkers. The emergency broadcast system was telling everyone to take cover immediately. Jake pulled up the scanner feed on his computer. What he saw made his blood run cold. The object was entering the planet's atmosphere, and it was massive. The screen showed a heat signature bigger than any ship humanity had ever built. Bigger than the colony stations. Bigger than anything Jake had ever imagined could fly. Then he saw it with his own eyes. Through the window, breaking through the morning clouds, came a creature that made Spark look like a tiny insect by comparison. It was a dragon, just like Spark, but scaled up to an impossible size. Its wingspan had to be at least 2 miles across. Scales that looked like polished black glass covered its body, and they caught the sunlight in a way that made the creature look like a moving constellation. The colony's defense systems activated automatically. Jake watched in horror as the automated weapons fired missiles and energy beams at the approaching dragon. Every single shot simply vanished when it hit the creature's hide. The energy weapons didn't even leave a mark. It was like trying to hurt a mountain with a flashlight. The dragon descended slowly, deliberately, completely ignoring the attacks. Jake could see people in the streets now, some still running for shelter, others just standing frozen in terror. The creature was so big that its shadow covered half the colony as it approached. And it was coming straight toward Jake's workshop. His survival instincts screamed at him to run. Every rational part of his brain told him to get as far away as possible. But his legs wouldn't move. He stood there, watching this impossible being land just outside his shop. The impact shook the ground so hard that tools fell off his workbenches. The windows rattled in their frames. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Spark rushed to the door, making excited chirping sounds. The little dragon's fear had completely vanished, replaced by pure joy. Jake's hand moved to the door control, then stopped. This was it. The moment of truth. He was about to face the parent of the creature he'd been hiding for 2 weeks. A parent who could probably destroy the entire colony without breaking a sweat. He opened the door. The first thing that hit him was the sheer presence of the creature. The mother dragon's head alone was the size of Jake's entire workshop. Her eyes were different from Spark's, deeper somehow, like looking into the night sky and seeing galaxies swirling in the darkness. She lowered her massive head, bringing one enormous eye level with the doorway. Spark limped out, favoring the healing wing but moving as fast as it could. The little dragon chirped and called out, running to its mother's front leg and rubbing against scales that were each bigger than Jake's truck. The mother dragon made a sound, low and rumbling, that Jake felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears. It was a sound of relief, of joy, of a parent reunited with a lost child. Then those massive eyes turned to Jake. He wanted to look away but couldn't. The dragon was studying him with an intensity that made him feel completely transparent, like she could see not just his body but his thoughts, his memories, his very soul. For what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, Jake stood there being examined by an intelligence that was clearly far beyond human understanding. He thought about all the things he could say. Explanations, apologies, pleas for mercy. But his throat was dry, and the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just stood there, a mechanic in grease-stained coveralls, facing down a cosmic being that could end his life with less effort than he'd used to swat a fly. The mother dragon made another sound, softer this time. She carefully examined Spark's wing with a gentleness that seemed impossible for something so huge. Her head moved close enough that Jake could feel the heat radiating from her scales. She sniffed at the carbon fiber splints he'd used, at the bioadhesive gel holding the torn membrane together. She was inspecting his work. Jake found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. I did my best. I'm just a mechanic, not a doctor, but I couldn't just leave your kid out there to die. He had no idea if she understood human speech. But those ancient eyes seemed to soften slightly. The dragon pulled back, spreading her wings in a way that blocked out the sun. For a terrifying moment, Jake thought this was it. She was about to do something, and he had no idea what. But she didn't attack. She didn't destroy anything. She simply looked at Jake one more time, a look that he would never be able to fully describe to anyone else. Then, with movements that were surprisingly careful for something so large, she launched herself back into the sky. The force of her takeoff knocked Jake backward, and he landed hard on his workshop floor. Spark stood in the doorway, watching its mother disappear into the clouds. The little dragon turned back to Jake and made a questioning chirp. Where was she going? Why had she left again? Jake had no answers. He pulled himself up, his whole body shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. The colony's emergency channel was exploding with confused chatter. The creature had left. It hadn't destroyed anything. It hadn't attacked. People were emerging from shelters, trying to understand what had just happened. Jake's personal communicator was buzzing with messages from colony officials demanding to know why the creature had landed at his location. He ignored them all. Something told him this wasn't over. The mother dragon had left, yes, but she'd done so carefully. She'd examined her child, studied Jake, and then departed without causing harm. That wasn't the behavior of a mindless beast. That was the behavior of someone with a plan. Jake didn't have to wait long for answers. The mother dragon returned less than 20 hours later, and this time she wasn't alone. She was carrying something massive in her claws, something that showed up on the colony's scanners long before anyone could see it with their eyes. The alarms went off again, but this time there was less panic. People had seen the dragon leave peacefully before. Maybe this time would be the same. Jake was in his workshop, trying to explain to increasingly angry colony officials why he'd been hiding an alien creature for 2 weeks. The video call was not going well. The station governor was red-faced and shouting about protocols and regulations when the entire building shook. Everyone fell silent. Through the window, Jake could see her returning, wings spread wide, carrying what looked like a small mountain. The officials on the video call started yelling again, but Jake ended the connection. Whatever was about to happen was more important than their bureaucratic complaints. He stepped outside, Spark following close behind him. The little dragon seemed excited, bouncing on its feet and making happy chirping sounds. The mother dragon descended with incredible precision for something so huge. She was carrying an asteroid, Jake realized. A massive chunk of rock and metal that had to weigh thousands of tons. But she handled it like Jake would carry a toolbox. With movements that were almost gentle, she set the asteroid down about 50 feet from his workshop. The impact still shook the ground, but nothing was damaged. She'd placed it perfectly in the empty lot next to his building. Then she looked at Jake one more time. Her eyes seemed to be saying something, though he couldn't quite understand what. She touched her snout to Spark's head in what was clearly an affectionate gesture, then launched back into space. This time, Jake knew she wasn't coming back. Whatever she'd needed to do was done. For a moment, Jake just stood there staring at the massive rock she'd left behind. It was roughly spherical, maybe 30 feet across, with a dark surface that glinted in the sunlight. Spark walked over to it and tapped it with one claw, then looked back at Jake as if to say, "Look what Mom brought." Jake's communicator exploded with incoming calls. He ignored most of them, but he couldn't ignore the colony's head surveyor, Beth Rodriguez, who physically showed up at his workshop 10 minutes later with her scanning equipment. Beth was in her 50s, no nonsense, and one of the few people in the colony Jake actually respected. "Jake, what in the name of all that's holy is going on here?" she demanded, setting up her scanners. "First you've got a dragon landing at your shop, now there's an asteroid in your parking lot, and people are saying you've been hiding some kind of alien creature." Jake sighed. There was no point in lying anymore. "Her name is Spark. I found her crashed in the valley 2 weeks ago. I fixed her broken wing. That big dragon that keeps showing up is her mother. And I have no idea why she just gave me a rock." Beth stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "You fixed a baby dragon's wing with repair equipment, and the mother is giving you gifts. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard, and I once saw a man try to cook dinner during a hull breach." She turned on her scanners and pointed them at the asteroid. The numbers that appeared on her screen made her go very still. She checked the readings again. Then a third time. Her face went pale. "Jake, do you have any idea what this is?" "A rock," Jake offered. "This isn't just a rock. This is a solid core asteroid. Do you know what that means?" Beth's hands were shaking as she held up the scanner. "This thing is almost pure precious metals. Gold, platinum, iridium, osmium. And there are elements here I've never seen before, things that aren't on any periodic table. Jake, this asteroid is worth more money than I can even calculate. We're talking about trillions. Maybe more." Jake felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "That can't be right. My equipment doesn't lie." Beth looked at him with wide eyes. "That dragon just made you the richest person in human space. This is a thank you gift for saving her kid." Within an hour, the news had spread through the entire colony. Within 6 hours, it had reached the inner systems. By the end of the day, every major news network in human space was talking about Jake Miller, the mechanic who'd saved a dragon and received a mountain of gold as payment. The colony's corporate overseers arrived the next morning, 3 executives in expensive suits who'd taken the express shuttle from the nearest major station. They brought contracts, legal documents, and a lot of fancy talk about mining rights and corporate ownership. The lead executive, a thin man with perfect hair, explained that since Jake's workshop was on colony land, the asteroid technically belonged to the corporation. Jake was sitting in his shop, tired and overwhelmed, ready to just sign whatever they wanted. He didn't understand legal stuff. He just wanted to go back to fixing things and taking care of Spark. But before he could pick up the pen, a shadow fell over the colony. The mother dragon had returned. She didn't land this time. She just circled overhead, her massive form blocking out the sun. The ground trembled with each beat of her wings. And then she did something that made the executives' faces go white. She flew low over the asteroid, and as she passed, her scales began to glow. Energy pulsed from her body, creating a visible field around the asteroid and Jake's workshop. Every scanner in the colony went haywire. The message was clear. This gift was for Jake. Anyone who tried to take it would have to deal with her. The executives left on the next shuttle, their contracts unsigned. The colony governor, sweating and nervous, filed emergency paperwork that legally granted Jake full ownership of the asteroid and the land it sat on. Nobody wanted to argue with a creature that could probably destroy their entire world. Jake sat on his workshop steps that evening, watching the sunset with Spark curled up next to him. The little dragon's wing was almost completely healed now. In a few more days, Spark would be able to fly. Jake still couldn't quite process what had happened. A few weeks ago, he'd been a simple mechanic barely making ends meet. Now he owned more wealth than some planets. His communicator buzzed with another incoming call. This time it was from the human colonial government, official seal and everything. Jake almost ignored it, but something made him answer. The woman on the screen introduced herself as an ambassador, and she had a question that would change everything. "Mr. Miller, we need to know. Do you think you could talk to them? The dragons? Would like to establish communication." Jake stared at the ambassador on his screen and almost laughed. They wanted him to be some kind of diplomat? He was a mechanic who'd barely finished technical school. He fixed broken machines, not interstellar relations. But then he looked at Spark, who was watching him with those intelligent golden eyes, and he realized something. He might be the only human who could do this. "I can try," he told the ambassador. "But I'm not making any promises. I don't even know if they'll come back." He didn't have to wonder for long. 3 days later, Spark's wing had healed enough for short flights. The little dragon spent hours gliding around Jake's workshop, clearly thrilled to be flying again. That evening, as the sun was setting, Spark suddenly stopped mid-flight and landed next to Jake. The dragon looked up at the sky and made that deep, thrumming call. The mother dragon appeared within minutes, descending from the clouds with 3 others of her kind. They were all massive, each one slightly different in color and size. Jake's heart pounded as they landed in the valley beyond the colony, close enough to see but far enough to not cause damage. Spark took off, flying toward them with obvious joy, reuniting with its family. Jake walked out to meet them, his legs shaking but his resolve firm. He'd saved a life without expecting anything in return. If these beings wanted to talk, he'd listen. If they wanted him to speak, he'd find the words. As he approached, the mother dragon lowered her head, bringing her eye level with him once again. This time, Jake didn't look away. What happened next was something Jake would never be able to fully explain to anyone. It wasn't quite telepathy, and it wasn't quite speech. It was more like understanding flowing directly into his mind. Images, feelings, concepts that bypassed language entirely. The dragons had been traveling the galaxy for millions of years. They'd seen countless species rise and fall. Most intelligent beings, when they found a helpless creature from another species, would have studied it, exploited it, or ignored it. Very few would simply help. The mother showed Jake images of other species they'd encountered. Some had tried to capture dragon young for weapons or experiments. Others had tried to bargain, demanding payment for basic kindness. Humans were new to the cosmic stage, barely out of their home system, and the dragons had been watching with interest. Jake's simple act of fixing a broken wing without asking for anything had answered a question the dragons had been waiting to see answered. Were humans worth knowing? Jake felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all. He tried to explain that he wasn't special, that plenty of humans would have done the same thing. But the dragon seemed to find that amusing. She showed him images of the corporate executives who tried to steal his gift, of the military officials who were already discussing ways to weaponize dragon biology, of the scientists who wanted to capture Spark for study. Not all humans were kind, she seemed to say, but some were. And that was enough. Over the following months, Jake became something he'd never expected. Not quite an ambassador, not quite a translator, but a bridge between two species. The dragons didn't share technology. They didn't offer weapons or ships or anything that could be exploited. But they shared something far more valuable. They shared knowledge about the galaxy, about other species, about places humans hadn't even discovered yet. Jake used his newfound wealth to build something meaningful. He established a medical and engineering facility right there on Frontier Station 7, now renamed First Contact Station. The institute focused on helping beings of all kinds, using the techniques Jake had developed while fixing Spark's wing. How do you adapt human medical knowledge to alien biology? How do you fix something when you don't understand how it works? Jake had learned by doing, and now he taught others. Doctors, engineers, and scientists came from across human space to study at Jake's institute. And they weren't just human anymore. The dragons spread word through their ancient network of connections, and other species began to arrive. Species that had never contacted humanity before came because they'd heard about the human who helped without asking for payment, who built a place dedicated to healing anyone who needed it. Spark chose to stay with Jake. The young dragon, now fully grown to about the size of a horse, became a constant presence at the institute. Watching Spark work alongside human doctors, helping translate concepts between species, made Jake realize something profound. This was what first contact should look like. Not militaries posturing, not corporations seeking profit, but individuals choosing to help each other. The colony that had once been a struggling mining outpost transformed into one of the most important locations in human space. Ships arrived daily, bringing patients, students, and representatives from dozens of species. Jake's repair shop still stood at the center of it all, unchanged except for a simple plaque by the door that read, "It started here with kindness." Not everyone was happy with how things turned out. Military leaders complained that Jake had missed an opportunity to gain dragon technology. Corporate executives grumbled about lost profits. Some politicians argued that one mechanic shouldn't have so much influence over humanity's relationship with alien species. Jake ignored them all. He'd learned something important from the dragons. Technology and weapons and power were temporary. But compassion, the choice to help someone simply because they needed it, that was universal. Years passed, and Jake trained hundreds of people in cross-species medical care. The techniques developed at his institute saved countless lives across dozens of worlds. The dragons maintained their relationship with humanity, limited but genuine, based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. They would occasionally visit the station, bringing gifts of rare materials or knowledge about distant regions of space. One evening, Jake sat outside his old workshop with Spark, now a magnificent adult dragon with scales that shimmered in the starlight. Ships were landing and taking off in the distance, carrying people and beings from across the galaxy. The young mechanic who just wanted a quiet life had somehow ended up changing the course of human history. "You know what's funny?" Jake said to Spark, who rumbled in response. "I was just trying to fix a broken wing. That's all. I saw something hurt, and I helped. That's it." Spark made a sound that Jake had learned meant agreement, or maybe amusement. The dragon knew the truth, even if Jake sometimes forgot it. The simplest acts could have the biggest consequences. Fixing one broken wing had opened the door to the stars, proving that humanity had something to offer the galaxy beyond weapons and technology. They had the capacity for kindness without expectation of reward. And sometimes, Jake thought as he watched the stars, that was the most powerful thing of all.